is committed to becoming climate neutral by 2050. We all agree on the direction of travel, but we're not all starting from the same place. The more closely we look at the big picture, the more obvious it becomes. To deliver on a Green Deal promises, we need to start with the different impacts climate change and climate action have on women and men. We need to listen to the voices of millions of Europeans and change the way we all live and work to ensure that no one is left behind. The Green Deal offers a once-in-a-generation opportunity to explore radical solutions that cut carbon and at the same time improve gender equality. So let's build the future we all want to see together.
Hello and welcome to the European Institute for Gender Equality's two-part webinar series, which is based on this year's Gender Equality Index thematic focus on the socially fair transition of the European Green Deal. My name is Georgie Bradley and I'm the Communications and Media Officer at EIGE, and I'll be moderating today's webinar, which looks at how we can move towards green and gender equal transport in the EU. Now, this is quite a loaded topic because there are so many moving parts to it. In the first instance, we have two core priority areas. We have climate action goals and gender equality goals. And you might think, well, how do we bridge the two together? I think it's worth noting the common denominator between the two at first, which is people. Therefore, there's nothing to say that we can't accelerate the green transition as well as gender equality at the same time. We just need to know the how and the why, which is why the aim for this webinar today is to come away from it with a better understanding on why a gender perspective is needed in green and sustainable transport. And by that I mean clean, affordable and accessible, taking into account the different and unique needs between women and men in all of their diversity. So this is the direction of travel for today's webinar. How are we going to get there? Okay, so we need to take a big step back first, where EIGE's experts will walk and talk us through the state of gender equality in the transport sector and why gender is a key factor in promoting green mobility. And then once we have a more kind of situational analysis behind us, this becomes the basis for opening up the discussion for the more practical side of where we need to be with our external experts, where we'll look at equality initiatives, how they're being implemented, and what more needs to be done for policy and decision makers to design and shape better transport policies. And then in between, we've got a lot of promising examples, which looks at where change has and is still taking place. Before we begin, though, I have one logistical note. For everybody watching from home, at work, on the run, wherever you are, on the right side of the live stream, you should see the Slido platform. We want you to be part of the conversation, so please pop in your questions there, and where we can, we'll address them in the live discussion. But if we can't, then they will be answered to and then uploaded onto our website. This is our aim, at least. So with that, I'm going to hand you over to EIGE's experts from the Research and Indices team, Annabelle Wilschut and Blondine Mollard, who will tell us a little bit about where women stand in the green transition in transport and, crucially, why it matters. Thank you.
After the launch of the Gender Equality Index 2023 in October, we are very excited today to dive deeper into the thematic focus of the Gender Equality Index. Today we are talking about a gender equal and green transition in the transport sector. We will take you through the different gender equality aspects of the green transition in transport sector, namely looking looking at the gender transport patterns, specifically in relation to gender mobility, the representation of women and men in the labor force, and the representation of women in political decision-making about transport systems. Also, we will be taking into account the aspect of intersecting inequalities where data and evidence is available. Naturally, we will look at how this data and evidence can feed into not only a green but also a gender equal transition within the transport sector, and our contribution will end with the steps to take. I would like to give the floor to my colleague Blondie Mollard to speak on gender mobility patterns and the labour force.
Thank you very much, Annabelle. Indeed, today we are discussing why transport is so central to the success of the European Green Deal, while also key to achieving gender equality in the EU. First of all, we know that the sector contributes to about a quarter of the EU's carbon emission. This in itself justifies and explains the sort of the urgency to promote the decarbonization of the sector. But also beyond emission, it also produces air, noise, and water pollution with detrimental effects on our health and our environment. Second, it's also one of the largest job sectors in the EU, with over 10 million employees and 1.2 million companies. Overall, more broadly, transport is central and it's key to a dynamic economic and social life. And as such, it's key to progress on gender equality. It's a catalyst for access to education, for access to employment and public services. To give you just one example, IGE's research on infrastructure a few years ago has shown that women are more likely, significantly more likely than men, to rate public transportation to be very important for their access to employment. So because transport is relevant to both gender equality and the green transition, it makes sense for us to consider the different patterns of women and men in terms of travel when designing programs and policies to develop green mobility. We have known now for a long time that women and men use different modes of transport in different ways for different purposes. We know that women tend to have more complex travel patterns because they often have to combine their income-generating activities with unpaid care. And from that perspective, IGE's unique survey data collected from across the EU, over 62,000 people, shows to us that indeed women are slightly more likely than men to apply their concern for the climate and the environment to their daily lives. 22% of women and 19% of men who replied to the survey report using low-carbon transport options on a daily basis. So it's really walking the talk in that regard. In addition, as you can see on the slide, women in the EU are slightly more likely to walk or to use public transportation to get around on a typical work week. In turn, men are more likely to use a private bike or scooters, and also motorcycle and moped. This is also consistent with research showing that women are a bit lagging behind when it comes to using cycling for transport, even if I believe this is changing, because they are showing greater concern for safety and the quality of cycling infrastructure. But despite those different modes of transport that showing that women tend to have consistently a higher uptake of climate-friendly behavior, including in their travel patterns, we still see through this data a really persistent reliance on the personal car. As you can see, 70% of men in the EU and 66% of women mention their personal car as being one of the top 3 ways that they get around in a typical week. And across the survey, we looked at different population groups, and the likelihood of men using the car more than women is verified across the groups of regardless of education level, of age, of also where people live, if it's a urban or rural area. So in a nutshell, reducing carbon emission also comes with giving people more options, including options to not to use their personal car necessarily. And we know that the switch to greener option needs therefore to take in consideration gender and its intersectional factors. Now, moving to the representation of women in the transport sector, we know that the overarching figure of 22% of women workers in the EU actually masks a great variation of situation across the countries and the subsectors. For example, the land transport subsector is one in which women are the most severely underrepresented. As you can see on the slide, they represent 15% of the workers in that subsector. On the other side, we have also air transport, where women represent 40% of employees. And it's believed that because in that subsector, comparatively to other, there are a greater share of administrative sale or service roles, which are more typically used, held by women. When we speak to women in the sectors, they mention some of the most common obstacles that they encounter to progressing their careers in the sector. And they mention gender segregation, both in terms of occupation, the fact that women are still a little bit underrepresented in technical roles and overrepresented in admin roles, but also vertical segregation with lower access to decision-making and leadership positions. They also mentioned difficult working conditions, including poor work-life balance. Yeah, so in a nutshell, that's all I wanted to say for now. So I would like to give you back the floor, Annabelle, for your analysis on decision-making positions.
Thank you, Blandine. Indeed, a large part of gender equality is decision-making. Who makes the political decisions about the future of transport and transport systems? Women's representation in political decision-making is particularly important because governments at all levels play a leading role in steering the development of sustainable transport and the building of sustainable transport systems. A few data points from EIGE's statistical brief on gender balance in the European Green Deal paints the following picture. First, the good news. Women's representation in the Committee on Transport and Tourism has increased from 26% in 2012 to 40% in 2023. Also, it is one of the only committees in European Parliament dealing with areas of the Green Deal that is chaired by a woman. In May 2023, among commissioners, cabinet members, directors and DGs dealing with transport, 50% were women, with the head of cabinet being a man and the commissioner being a woman. However, there's another side of the coin. The share of women in national parliamentary committees dealing with transport sits only at 27%. In November 2022, just 14% of senior ministers dealing with transport were women. Thus, however, we see that in some areas, gender equality is moving towards a gender balance, for example, on the EU level. Looking at member state level, there's a strong gender inequality in political decision-making concerning transport. Therefore, the need for sustained political will for improving women's representation in all levels of decision-making is ever relevant, and also while also filling in the data gaps that are there on local and regional level decision-making. So moving on from all this data and evidence, what are the steps we can take to ensure that the transition we have to make is not only green, but is also gender equal? The European Green Deal is historic, and as we've shown today, more and more evidence points to the fact that gender equality is central to the implementation, that we have to regard the need to consider differentiated transport use, equal opportunities and contributions in the labour force, and decision-making about transport systems. We have solid policies to make the transition towards a green future. It is important to follow through on EU, national, regional level. In this endeavour, it's paramount to make sustainable transport affordable, available, and accessible to all. Evidence shows that different groups have different needs based on, for example, gender, income, and also where a person lives in Europe, for example, rural or in city areas. Luckily, there are upcoming opportunities to strengthen the gender equality aspects in the future in transport in Europe. For example, in 2026, the Social Climate Fund will be introduced, mean to address the social impact of the emission trading system that will follow in 2027, to reduce costs for vulnerable households, micro-enterprises and transport users. To strengthen gender equality in the implementation of these initiatives could pave the way for a green and gender equal transition. Meanwhile, at the European Institute for Gender Equality, via the 3 Steps Forward campaign, we invite actors to formulate their steps to create awareness and ensure that this transition in transport is not only green, but also gender equal. That's all for us from now. We look forward to hearing the external experts and to the discussion later on.
Great, thank you so much for that broader picture view, Annabelle and Blondine. I think we have a better sense of where we stand at the moment with women in the transport sector. I love the fact that we're seeing a better representation of women in decision-making roles, and that's something that we've seen kind of charted over time. So it's true that change can happen when there's good political will and kind of measures in place. But one of the most significant takeaways, for me at least, is that there is still a stark contrast between the fact that women are more active users of public transport, and yet that doesn't correspond with the number of women in decision-making roles within the transport sector. Therefore, women's needs are underrepresented in the agendas of political decision-making, and therefore they are underrepresented in the overall outcomes. So I have a question related to the fact that there are clear gender differences in transport patterns. What do we see in terms of policies as far as doing a good job in addressing these needs? Can you speak to that a little bit more?
Well, I think it really varies across the countries, across the types of travel as well. We have some really good examples sometimes at municipal level or regional level, but and there are really a lot of very dedicated individuals trying to push this forward with the help of data and information. But I think there are still 3 major aspects that need to be improved on for diverse users of transport to have a better experience overall. I'm thinking specifically, first of all, I think of prevention of gender-based violence and especially harassment in public transport. I'm also thinking of improving the way you can use different modes of transport smoothly. Mm-hmm. And this is this intermodal approach to transport system, I think this is also very key for users who have different needs, including who have limited physical capacity or who travel with other people, young children or elderly. To make it smoother to go from one system to the next without too much effort or wasting too much time. I think this is also a key aspect. And the last one is also to not to forget those aspects when developing new modalities for mobility, for example, the shared mobilities. Mm-hmm. We've seen a lot of research showing that actually the way they are designed, where they are posted in a city actually do matter and does matter and affects who uses the most. Yeah. And so those aspects are really still something to consider very much.
Great, thank you so much for shedding light on the changes that need to be made to address women's needs in the transportation improvements. This is a really good opportunity to now move on over to the next segment in our webinar. Blondine, you've already mentioned some areas that we're going to be covering, like gender security concerns, and then we're going to stay in the kind of policy context at the moment, and I'll introduce to you some speakers in just a moment who will talk us through some of the things that are happening right now in real time. We'll see you in a minute. and welcome back after a minute of furniture moving, and we're now comfortably sat together in this little cozy setup. So now we're going to be joined live by two external speakers. We've got Ruth Lopian, who is the Policy Officer and Equality Coordinator at DG Mobility and Transport at the Commission, as well as Jenny Coutomarcu, who is the Head of the Communication and Knowledge Unit at URBACT. And we've also got some pre-recorded interventions from some speakers, whom I'll introduce when we get round to them. Have we got Ruth with us? Because I'd like to start off with Ruth. Hello, Ruth, how are you? Good afternoon. Can you hear us? We can't hear you yet.
Can you hear me now?
Absolutely, bright and clear, amazing.
Good.
So let's start off with you. We've already heard some of the core challenges affecting the green transition in transport, where women are concerned, because there are, as we've discussed quite concertedly, there are gendered patterns in the use of various means of transport, and we've established that the representation of women in top positions related to transport is of paramount importance. Can you start off by taking us through how women are being empowered in equality initiatives in transport?
Yes, thank you very much, Georgie. Maybe I could just start by saying that the Commission is actually leading by example, because we have, for the first time now for quite a while, first female president. We have a female commissioner who is in charge of transport. And since August, we also have a female director general in our director general for transport. So this is also the first time that we have a female leader at that level. But coming to our legislation, the Commission has launched a number of initiatives and legislation in the framework of the Gender Equality Strategy 2020 to 2025 in order to obtain and to come to a union of equality where all women and girls, men and boys can pursue their paths, their professions, and have equal opportunities to thrive. Some of the initiatives which of course concern all policy areas, they're not limited to transport, but they affect the transport sector, of course, are the implementation of the work-life balance directive, which will enable workers, women and men alike, to benefit from better work-life balance in their jobs. On pay transparency, which will allow comparability of salaries between what men and women earn in same or similar jobs. The Women on Boards Directive was eventually adopted in 2022 after 10 years of slowness in the council, and we have also made a proposal to stop gender-based violence, which is something that women often face when using public transport, and we have just heard that that women are the main public transport users in the European Union. In the transport sector and the transport policy area as such, we do not have specific legislation to improve gender equality, but we have launched a number of practical initiatives, such as notably our Women in Transport Platform for Change, which was already launched in 2017. And this platform is providing a very active forum for stakeholders in the transport sectors from all different modes of transport, and representing also workers and employers, and allows them to exchange information and good practice. The platform meets regularly. The next meeting will be on the 21st of November, and it actually still triggers interest in the transport industry stakeholders to join the platform and to actively contribute with initiatives that promote women as workers in the transport sector, and also to exchange information on how to make workplaces more interesting, more attractive to women, and to retain them also in the job. We have already mentioned that women only make up 22% of the transport workforce in the EU, and this is why it is so important to have such practical initiatives that should help the stakeholders improve the situation, improve the working conditions for women. The platform also participates in industry initiatives. For example, we have already participated several times in the Aviation for Girls Day. In 2022, we have launched a Women in Rail Award, and we are aiming to launch a similar initiative in the maritime sector, where we have just heard there are very few women. There are more in administrative tasks, but as regards, for example, sailors, we have only 2% of women represented there. So it is very important also to support this sector. I just want to finish by making a point about the link between gender, climate change, and other environmental challenges. We have already heard that women have different mobility patterns, and they are therefore also likely to be impacted in a different way by the impacts of climate change, depending on their different life circumstances and different capabilities of mitigating and adapting to climate change. And therefore, also the different programs and policies under the European Green Deal are likely to have very different impacts on women and girls compared to men and boys. We have, Blandine has mentioned earlier the more environmental choices that women tend to take with using smaller cars and using more public transport. And this is why it is very important to have more women in the transport workforce, and especially also in leadership positions, to contribute to greater focus on sustainable and environmentally friendly transport solutions, such as public transport, but also active mobility options such as cycling and walking. And thus women can be powerful catalysts of behavioral change. And we need, therefore, more women in the transport workforce, not only because we have staff shortages and we need to use the full talent pool of workers to keep our sector competitive and resilient, but we need also to have these diverse perspectives considered in decision making processes. We have also heard that accessibility and affordability of transport is a big issue, and women, often those in low income groups, are facing several barriers to access transport services, thus also limiting their access to essential services such as education, healthcare, and jobs. And this risks exacerbating the disparities between gender. Therefore, I would like to conclude by saying that we really need women leaders to help shape transport policies, infrastructure, and services that are more inclusive, sustainable, and responsive to the unique needs and challenges that women face, and as well our corporate gender equality legislation and strategies, and our down-to-earth practical initiatives such as the Women in Transport platform are contributing their share to achieving this objective.
Ruth, thank you so much for giving us so much food for thought at this point, especially how comprehensive the initiatives are, capturing so many different angles. And thank you so much for broadening the transport sector by going beyond what we normally think of as just the public transport, by going into aviation and maritime. That was really, really interesting. You've touched on it a little bit, but I want to go back to how the equality initiatives are not only addressing gender, but also other inequalities across the axis of social differences like age, income, migrant status, to name a few.
Yeah, under the Union of Equality, we of course have more initiatives. We also have an anti-racism action plan. We have a disability strategy. One of the key latest initiatives under the disability strategy is the proposal for a European disability card and a disability parking card, which will enable women, but not only women, but everybody with a disability who is traveling across borders in the EU to benefit from the same preferential treatment or tariffs when using transport services in the country where they are traveling to, as those offered to persons with disabilities who are resident in that country. But also in DG Mobility and Transport, we have launched a new initiative last year, which is the Network of Diversity Ambassadors in Transport, which is currently consisting of 84 ambassadors covering also all modes of transport, who aim to raise awareness and share experiences and good practices. The network covers all aspects of diversity, irrespective of sex, age, disability, race or ethnic origin, religion or sexual orientation, as well as social background and geography. The network, as I said, aims to share good practices and experience as regard transport workers, but also takes into account the needs of different transport users. The ambassadors have already started working in different groups looking into issues that diverse transport workforce and diverse transport users face. And I'm actually very happy to see that one of the videos, the pre-registered videos that we will see later, is given by one of our diversity ambassadors, Kathleen Jacobi. So we can see that the ambassadors are really active and are trying to spread the word on how beneficial diversity in transport is. We had a first meeting of the ambassadors already during this year, and we'll have another conference next year.
Thank you so much for that, Ruth. I want to pick up on one thing and kind of bring it to a close and then move on to, as you mentioned, Kathleen will be providing some promising practices. For all of these initiatives, all the projects, all the plans to come into fruition, it has to be based on something. It has to be based on experiences and the realities, which is where data collection comes in, so that we capture the full complexities of needs. Can you please speak to why data collection is so important and what some of the challenges are at the moment?
Yeah, as I said, all our policy needs to be underpinned, of course, by data, and this is where also EIGE's Gender Equality Index is providing a big help to us, because we are always looking for gender disaggregated data, and this is really an area which is still lacking. We had different calls, for example, from the European Court of Auditors, through a report that the Commission needs to collect more gender disaggregated data to supplement their funding programs and to ensure that funding programs are benefiting all genders equally. Also, the European Parliament has published a an own initiative report recently where they also call for the collection of gender disaggregated data at all levels, because the Commission cannot collect this data itself. We need, of course, the support of national authorities, of member states, but also of the industry to help us with this data collection, especially where it arises in the use of public transport, in the use of other transport means, and this will help us, of course, to ensure that the policies that we are making, that the legislation that we are producing, will be much more gender equal and will benefit all users and all workers in all their diversity.
Ruth, thank you so much for your comprehensive and thoughtful insights. I think this is a good moment to bring in some good practices at play. Next, we're going to hear from, as Ruth mentioned, Kathleen Jacobi, who is a Sustainability Portfolio Coordinator from Transport Infrastructure Ireland, who is going to share some examples of gender-sensitive practices. So let's have a look at what we can see and learn from Ireland.
My name is Kathleen Jacobi and I am the Sustainability Portfolio Coordinator for Transport Infrastructure Ireland. TII is a state agency providing national road, cycling and light rail infrastructure and services in the Republic of Ireland. In 2018, one of my colleagues learned about gender issues in transport at the ITF Summit in Leipzig. In 2020, we published our Travelling in a Woman's Shoes study. It is the first study of this kind for Ireland, and it explores how women in Ireland experience transport and mobility. Among the key findings were a high car dependency of women in Ireland, and that public transport and cycling can compete directly with cars, but fail to meet many women's needs. Based on findings of Travelling in a Woman's Shoes, we are advancing better integration of social sustainability and gender equality into our work. One element of this was the development of a gender lens checklist tool for our light rail projects. The tool is currently being piloted with our Luas Finglas project, and its progress is being measured and recorded just like other deliverables in the project. Luas Finglas is a 4-kilometer extension to the Luas Green Line, and the alignment interacts with numerous amenity spaces, so the design is more focused on interactions with people. Understanding the community is an integral part of the design process, and for the first time, we are collecting qualitative data in addition to data relating to interactions with traffic. The Public Life Toolkit by Gale Architects essentially measures life and space together. Public life surveys capture pedestrian, age, gender and stationary activity for a place. We added social groups to our survey to learn more about dynamics of social activity in places. When looking at public transport and public spaces, who isn't there is at least as important as who's there. The Cabral Finglas area has a relatively old population compared to the rest of the country. The age group over 65 has significantly more women than men, but there are significantly less women than men using the green spaces. This overview shows that more men than women walk, cycle or run, but more women walk with dogs. This was a surprising finding, and some of the women surveyed stated they feel safer. We have done a follow-up survey to get another set of data, but the results are not available yet. To monitor and evaluate the impact of the project, these surveys will be repeated after delivery of Luas Finglas. In addition to statutory public consultation and regular engagement with our Luas user group, our project team held one-on-one meetings with residents, community groups and schools, site meetings with local groups during their activities, and collected stories from women about their experiences and challenges when traveling. Co-design activities are planned. Participatory processes are important to ensure public transport works for all, but these processes require additional resources and funding. Based on community engagement, the survey and subsequent data analysis, our design team has identified design challenges. Some examples are displayed on the screen. In addition, we need to understand when and how women walk and aim for equal representation in all areas. We need to explore what will make more women in the area cycle. Better infrastructure may not always be the answer. How do we encourage dog walking along the route? There are safety issues with dogs being close to trams. However, dog walking is a gender indicator, so we need to proactively design for it. This approach adds value to the design process, and it focuses the design team on specific data-based design challenges. We are working with the community to address these challenges. In 2024, we expect to publish 2 studies aiming to build on traveling in a woman's shoes. These studies also align with the recently published European Declaration on Cycling. Embedding gender considerations at project and organizational level takes dedication and commitment from the women and men working in multidisciplinary teams and from senior management. From research to work on the ground, it takes champions, and it takes time and effort to change existing norms. To quote one of my colleagues, gender takes double the effort. If you don't keep at it, people will go back to the way they've always done things. I've shared links to some resources with the organizers. There is our study and the tool, and we covered the development of Luis Fingles in an episode of our All Aboard TRI's Accessibility podcast, where we also have an episode on the EU TRIPS project, which has developed a co-creation toolkit and a free co-creation online course. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Kathleen. I just want to remind everybody that whatever resources you see in the presentations or what's been communicated here in the live discussion, it will be uploaded onto our website. So if you didn't catch it now, you'll catch it later. I really liked when she said that understanding the community is essential through qualitative data. And I know that's a given in the work that we do, but I think this is where you get to the heart of the issue by bringing it closer to home, hearing the real life stories, getting a sense of how people move through the world differently. So indeed, you can actually walk in someone else's shoes. I really liked the title of that report. Do we have any live reactions? I saw that you were kind of enjoying some parts of it, especially with the gender indicator on dog walking. If anybody wants to reflect on some of the things that Kathleen had brought up, I have my own reflections that I'd like to bring up, but I will give you the opportunity to speak to any aspects of her intervention.
Yes, personally, I thought this was very interesting when she, at first when I saw on the slide, dog walking, I was a bit intrigued. And then, of course, when she said that it's an indicator of women feeling safer if they have the dog with them to walk, especially I imagine that's particularly relevant at certain times of the day, very early in the morning or in the evening. So I thought that was very, very interesting.
I have a notion that I want to pick up on. Kathleen had mentioned family roles and how understanding the family unit can influence sustainable mode choices. Blondie mentioned earlier about IGA's time use survey, which looks at unpaid care and individual and social activities. How do family circumstances affect green mobility approaches in your perspective based on our evidence?
Yeah, so this survey has really helped us feel a very important data gap that to complete the domain of time and to really be able to understand how gender equality in time use has changed over years, and more specifically when it comes to climate-friendly behaviors, it has also shown us that unfortunately, the distribution of unpaid care is extremely slow to change. There are still some very uneven distribution across among women and men, and that's so the level of unpaid care that women produce in the family is still much higher than what is done by men. And that just reminds me what Kathleen was showing as well, saying that there was a woman with children who was saying, unfortunately, my children cannot walk to school because it's unsafe. So it's also showing how greater access to, active mobilities, green mobility can also reduce the level of unpaid care that women produce on a daily basis. So if everyone is able to use public transportation more freely, then it makes life easier for families in general.
Do you have any reflections?
Yeah, and I think picking up on what Blandine said, I think we really can't speak about gender equality if we don't speak about unpaid care and care responsibilities. And therefore, I think picking up on something that Ruth also mentioned is that we look at it holistically, in a sense that we're also talking about the Work-Life Balance Directive and not only about transport, how it communicates with gender equality, but also in a broader sense to see that we cover every aspect that is particularly relevant from a gender equality perspective.
Thank you so much. Do we have any reflections from Jenny or from Ruth, or we can move on to the next segment if you wanted to chime in on something? There are other opportunities later on, if not now. Okay, fantastic. So as we've already heard, many cities across the EU are striving to achieve more sustainable and equitable transportation networks for all. We're going to move over into something that's already been covered, but this now is going to look at it a bit more concretely about gender security concerns. We're going to be turning to Sandra Phillips, who is a shared mobility architect and founder of MoveMe, which brings to life shared mobility visions. She's going to introduce an app that addresses gender security concerns, which recently won the EmpowerWism Shared Mobility Award. Let's take a look.
Hello, thank you for having me and join your webinar remotely. I'm dialing in from the west coast of Canada, from the unceded territories of the Seychelles Nation. My name is Sandra Phillips. I am the initiator of an initiative called EmpowerWism, which stands for Empowering Women in Shared Mobility. I'm also a shared mobility architect, and I work for MoveMe, an organization I founded 9 years ago. Why did we start EmpowerWism? It's an initiative, or an award, I should say, that we started in 2020, a collaboration between MoveMe and a number of other organizations, UITP, ABB, Stanford University, ITS, to name a few of them. And the intention is really to bring organizations together to support women-founded transportation startups through a global network. We identify women-led startups in transportation. We created a global connected network that now consists of over 50 companies, and we then provide a launchpad. All of the partner organizations provide a launchpad to help make meaningful connections and help them accelerate really what they've started. So what are the companies that have applied? As I said, we have 50 companies. They have applied from all around the globe. We have, for instance, Charter Health, which is a US-based electric infrastructure servicing and maintenance company. We have Biko, which is from Australia, an electric bike share program. We have a number of actually winners in Europe. One is New Wheel, which is an electric trailer that you can attach to any bike, whether it's e-bike or not e-bike, for last mile logistics. We have this year's winner, which is a subscription service for cargo bikes targeting families. And we also had last year's winner, Halo, which is really focused on the safety of women. And so I'm going to dive into them for a little bit more. So what does Halo stand for? Halo stands for Help a Lady Out. It really works in two ways. They embed so-called safety cards in regular transportation apps. So think of what you have on an airplane, which is a safety transportation card, you know, what you do in an emergency. Similar to that, there's super simple visual safety cards that help women or anybody that feels threatened on public transport to de-escalate and get out of dicey situations. So if somebody is like encroaching on your space, how do you de-escalate that just with your body language, but without escalating it? At the same time, when these cards are accessed, they track that in a dashboard that then shows where there are risk zones. So it allows let's say, public transport provider, BVG, it allows them to figure out where are the hotspots, what time are these cards accessed more, which type of these cards are accessed more. And so that helps with understanding where the challenges are and what they can do on a larger scale. Now I've been specifically asked to also share the impact they've had. It's a bit too early to say. They have a number of pilots in flight, and to be very honest, they look for at least one other large-scale pilot where they could also collect a lot more data than some of these smaller pilots that they're working on. So a little bit too early to say, but will come. So what's next for Empowerism? We're currently working on the launch of the 2024 edition. We'll host, hopefully, an in-person award ceremony for the first time of Empowerism. We will create more virtual and in-person meeting opportunities for the cohorts. We've been doing this year, and it's been really valuable for all the Empowerism applicants. And we're always looking for business, government partners that are willing to support Empowerism, either by being jury members or through pilots or projects that we collaborate on. So if you're interested, if you want to learn more, please reach out. You can reach me at sandra@moveme.net. I will also make sure that you have my contact information through the organizers. So please feel free to reach out if you would like to participate. Thank you so much for listening to me, for having me. Have a wonderful rest of your webinar. Goodbye.
Oh, thank you very much, Sandra, for that. A quick note on this example and for other solutions for mainstreaming gender in the transport sector labour market. It's available in a report on gender imbalance in the transport sector prepared for the World Bank's Sustainable Urban Mobility for All initiative. Again, all these resources will be on our website in due course. It's really interesting, Blondine, earlier you had mentioned that the digitization of transport modalities can engender the threat of unsafety for women a lot. But then you have an example of how the digital world is seeking to overcome this threat. So it's like two sides of the same coin, but kind of working against each other, but also at the same time working with each other. So I find that it's a really interesting example of the problem, but then also the solution with the same means, right? I actually want to address the Gender Equality Index thematic focus on the concerns of gender security. Can you speak to some of the evidence that we have on physical and sexual attacks on public transport?
So yeah, of course. So the data that we have is still the one that was collected by the Fundamental Rights Agency almost 10 years ago. The new data is coming very soon. But what we do know is that harassment is one of the most common forms of violence against women in the EU. And for about 1 victim in 10, this harassment took place in public transportation. So this is indeed a very prevalent, a very important problem, but also beyond this figure, I think the impact on behavior, the level of concern that a lot of women, especially younger women, are experiencing in terms of their anticipation of using public transport. Maybe they change their behavior in terms of the hours that they travel or the route that they take. So the impact of that concern is probably much more massive than those 10% of women who experience actual violence.
And I suppose that 10% is based on the fact that the fear itself already changes the travel choices.
Yes, and there are some cities who have some examples of programs who have taken this seriously. We can already mention Barcelona. They have conducted their own specific studies around users of public transport, and they found that actually their experience was that it was an overwhelming percentage of female users who had experienced feeling unsafe in the transport system, and they really took this into account, and they developed their entire plan to sort of improve the lighting, also make sure that the staff of the transport transport system were trained specifically on this. We can also mention the example of Brussels, the region who developed a regional plan against gender-based violence that also included dimension focusing on public transport. So there are some things happening, but we cannot speak about it too much because it's really something that affects the experience of transport and is a very strong deterrent on using transport more for many users.
Yeah. And you mentioned the role of municipalities, and this is a really good moment to step into Jenny. If Jenny's still with us, I imagine that she is. Jenny is the head of the communication and knowledge unit at URBACT, which helps cities to develop an integrated set of actions for sustainable change. Jenny, I'd like you to begin with talking through your experience in bringing municipalities on board as far as success factors for change and what that looks like. Is it between kind of political will, resources, public pressure for reforms? Can you walk and talk us through it?
So just first, perhaps to start with the facts that 70% of global CO2 emissions come from cities, and most of them come from the motorized transportation. And when you put into the context the fact that only 22% of the transport workforce are women, and also when you put in context that only 29% of local councillors in Europe are women, that means that so far our transportation systems in cities have been designed by men, without necessarily taking into consideration specificities that concern women. And this has as a fact that there are quite a lot of gaps in the design and in the implementation of transportation and mobility systems in cities. And these gaps come mainly from, are about three dimensions. First of all, the safety of transport and mobility systems, the accessibility and how easy it is to move from one point to another within a city, and also the affordability dimension. How affordable is it for women with children to move across the city? Now, the good news is that the cities are now increasing their awareness on these gaps, and they are working more and more on sustainable urban mobility plans. So the involvement of women in these plans is absolutely essential, especially if we want these three aspects of safety, accessibility, and affordability to be met. I'm going to give you some examples, if you like, on each of these dimensions, how this can be translated in city practices. Let's start with the safety first. What do we mean when we speak about safety of mobility and transportation systems? Of course, there is the dimension that was just mentioned about the harassment, women feeling really insecure because of being harassed when traveling, when being in public transportation. But there are also other aspects that are mainly aspects in terms of design of public spaces. So first of all, let's speak about street lighting, how women are allowed, how women are facilitated, are given the incentives to walk or cycle into streets when there is no lighting, or the lighting is not appropriate for walking or cycling. Then there are other dimensions when it comes to women walking and traveling, or traveling mainly during the evening when it's dark, and then how they access from the bus stop or from the tram stop or from the metro stop to their homes when it's dark, and perhaps they are found in isolated places. when it comes to cycling, how are there bike corridors in a city? How are they? Do they exist? Are they safe enough to use them? There are also specificities in terms of bike corridors, how they are made, if they are just painted or if there is a specific separation from the street to the pavement. And then there are also, of course, some the lights of crossing a street, how the lights are smart enough, or the timing to cross the street is enough for a woman with strollers or a woman with many kids to cross the street. And there are also some other transport or transport stop or transport hubs that have to be more safe and secure for women, not to have any harassment problems when they're waiting for the bus or when they're waiting for their metro. Then in terms of accessibility, this is also something that women, especially with children, with strollers, they need to have within their cities when they want to access point A to want to access point B from point A. So, for example, how is it easy for them to walk or to cycle or to use the transportation with 3 children, with 4 children, and these are kind of fundamental basic questions that every woman with children or with disabilities even ask themselves when they want to make a trip within the city. How the pavements are designed, for example, for women to walk alone or to walk with a stroller. Is there enough of a space? Either if there is enough of a space to move with strollers. These are kind of basic questions, but very fundamental for women to not be isolated also in their corner, in their district, but to be able to walk or to cycle or to take transportation to go to the other parts of the city. And then there's the question of the affordability, as we said before. How affordable is the transportation system for women? And or women with children, monoparental women, for example, having 2, 3, 4 children, even more, how they can access other parts of the city without having to pay a fortune to move from a place to another. So there are some good practices already in cities, and we will see afterwards the city of Umeå in Sweden that has taken really the leap to protect women from cases of harassment, but also facilitate their travel within the city. But there are also some other tools like the gender responsive public procurement tool that can be used by local authorities to facilitate, especially to facilitate the involvement of women within the design, the policy making of a city in terms of transportation. And I can give you a bit more of information just afterwards.
Jenny, thank you so much. I think all these aspects for gender equality in transport, it all comes from being given practical guidance with step-by-step tools. And I noticed on Urbac's website you have a toolbox with resources to help shape better cities. Now, you've covered a lot of ground on what is happening, but I would like you to kind of open the toolbox for us and pick out a couple of tools and resources and tell us a little bit about what they are and how they can be used with some real practical guidance, so that we can go from theory to practice, so that we're not kind of staying in the sort of abstract zone, so that people can really picture it in their mind how these tools can be implemented for change.
Indeed, there is. We have had quite a lot of work already with existing urban cities on the topic of mobility, but also on gender. So we have produced last year. We produced a report on gender equal cities, where we have really specific cases on how different cities across the EU have really taken the leap to involve women in the design and the implementation of transportation systems and mobility systems. And we have also a specific module, capacity building module, to explain how local authorities can embed specific gender criteria, gender clauses and dimension in their public procurement. So, for example, when a local authority wants to extend the bus line, or wants to have more buses, a new bus line within the city, then in terms of purchasing this service to an external service provider, they can, in their public procurement, they can really embed some very specific practical clauses that they can find in this module for public for gender responsive public procurement. They can include them in their terms of reference. So this is really a very practical recommendation that they can find in this report on gender equal cities, and in this video module of gender responsive public procurement. And then in terms of the other tools that anybody can find on this URBACT toolbox, which is online, there are different ways of how to engage with women, how to engage with local stakeholders when it comes to taking decision in the transportation system. So very, very useful tools with guidance also that can be used by local authorities, but also by regional authorities, and sometimes also by national authorities.
Thank you so much. We actually have a question from the audience. Can you please comment to what extent countries manage to take gender inequalities into account while designing their national recovery and resilience plans? I think this might be for anyone who wants to chime in on that. If you want, I can repeat it again because it's quite loaded. Can you please comment to what extent countries manage to take gender inequalities into account while designing their national recovery and resilience plans?
So I can take that one.
Yeah.
Actually, last year we worked on that topic at EIGE for the Swedish presidency. We looked also at the national plans that were submitted to the European Commission for dispersing the funds to support countries in their recovery, and we found that it was actually not a very systematic in the inclusion of gender concerns in those plans. There was a few ad hoc measures here and there, or specific measures, but not really anything very integrated from across the plans. So unfortunately, this is something that we consider a bit as a missed opportunity in terms of mainstreaming gender in the recovery. But another very concrete opportunity that is really ongoing at the moment is that countries are now producing their national energy and climate plans. And this is really a very good opportunity to reflect gender equality concerns, either in terms of women in the labor market of the key transition sectors, or in terms of the gender needs for users. So this is something that I really encourage anyone to sort of call on their governments to really include the consultation of civil society organizations or women's groups, to make sure that those plans really reflect the gender equality goals that the countries have adopted.
Yeah. You spoke to joining up and working together rather than in silos. If there's a common goal, there should be a common path to get there together. You mentioned the Swedish presidency. We're now going to Sweden, actually, for our final example of a promising practice. We're heading up to the Swedish city of Umeå, where gender equality officers Annika Dallin and Linda Gustafsson will provide some insights into how Umeå is striving to become a climate-neutral city. Let's go.
Hi everyone, My name's Linda. I work for the City of Umeå as a gender equality officer.
And my name is Annika, and I am also a gender equality officer at the City of Umeå, and we both work in the planning department. And we're here to tell you a little bit about how we worked in the City of Umeå with mobility and gender and climate neutrality. And when we work at gender equality in any aspect or in any area of work, data is really important to us in order to understand what possible discrepancies there are. For example, when it comes to mobility, we have a travel habit survey. This travel habit survey looks at how our inhabitants travel, when and where, and by what means of transport. What we see in that travel habit survey is that 60% of the travels in our city currently are made by sustainable modes of transport, which is biking, biking, walking, and buses, for example, public transport. But our goal is that 65% of all travels within the urban area of the city should be made by sustainable modes. If we look a little bit deeper into these numbers and look at the gender segregated data, we see that 66% of women's travels are sustainable, whereas only 55% of men's travels are sustainable. This means that if the men of the City of Umeå would travel like the women do, we would have already reached our goal of sustainable travel.
And that's also one of the reasons that when we work with changing travel behavior, and we try to focus on male-dominated workplaces, because we know that in the female-dominated workplaces, people already, or women already travel quite sustainable. So in order to make our interventions efficient, we focus on male-dominated workplaces. And one of the areas that we've been working with is an industrial area that's located quite close to the city center. It used to be further away, but the city is growing, so it's now quite close to the city center. And it's also an area where it's possible to take your bike or take public transportation. Maybe not the best and the easiest access in the city, but it's possible. But it's a male-dominated area, a lot of smaller industries, and the car is used to a very high extent to travel to and from work. And what we've done is we've done interviews, observational studies, field studies. We've used personas to understand travel behavior. We've talked about gender equality. We've talked about an uneven distribution of the unpaid housework and care for children, for example. But we also talked about the infrastructure of the area. So timetables for the bus stops, bike lanes, safety, security, etc. And the results, Annika?
And the results, well, this was a pre-study that we did, and we have some concrete results in terms of changing timetables for the buses to make them fit better with the work hours of the industries of the area. We have concrete planning for more bus stops and more bike lanes, but also a really important result is that this is a good example of collaborative work between the public sector and the private sector, because a lot of these companies have also worked really hard with changing norms within their employees, and also kind of providing the possibilities to change their travel behavior. For example, providing bike parking at the companies, but also things like giving extra vacation days for those who travel more sustainable.
So thank you very much for listening to our quick presentation about the work that we're doing currently. If you're interested in knowing more about the work, you're very welcome to contact us in the City of Umeå, or you can go and visit our website, umea.se. Have a lovely day.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Not only am I interested to learn more, I propose a field trip. We all go to the City of Umeå, if anything, to meet Annika and Linda and find out a little bit more about their initiatives. I love that their initiatives are not developed in Avoid. They are based on real-life travel behaviours, and I found it very interesting that they place emphasis on male-dominated work. I saw you had some reactions there. Do you want to speak to anything related to that?
Yeah, I think as a gender equality researcher, this is really also what you want to see, in the sense that data and policy kind of work together. It's very data informed, and it's really targeted. You see, they look at the gender patterns, and then they target also the places that would need to be targeted to reach the green goals. And this is actually quite a good example, as of course are the other examples of the external experts presented today. This is really what you want to see, I think, when you look at the interplay of data and policy.
Yeah, I have a question actually. How can we transfer good practices from one city to another? What are some of the concrete steps that we need to take to realize one city's good practice and transfer it to a very different context in more ways than one? I mean, this is also open to Ruth and Jenny if you want to chime in as well. But I mean, this is a great, promising example. But how would it work in a completely other cultural, physical context as well?
Perhaps I can start, Georgie.
Yeah.
I can start. This is exactly the mission of the URBACT program. So URBACT really funds and enables the exchange of good practices amongst European cities. So, for example, what you saw in Umeå, what you were presented by Linda and Annika, really happened also. They also were involved in an URBACT network with other European cities, and their good practices were also transferred to other European cities that were interested in these practices. So URBACT is also a vehicle funded by the European Union to allow these exchanges, this good practice transfer from one city to another. Because it is true that when you see what is going on in other cities, then you can see what is working, what is not working, and then you can decide what you can adapt, what you can change in your own city. It's not about really transferring and coping as such, but it's about adapting a good practice from one city to another. So I really encourage, if we have here with us local authorities, to get involved in URBACT networks. We are going to have our next call for networks in January. 10th of January, we're going to launch a new call for networks. So cities, local authorities will be invited to submit proposals for getting involved in networks. And this is a really good way for transferring, for exchanging different ideas, with the support also of experts in different topics around urban development, but also around these questions on gender and transportation.
Thank you so much, Jenny, for your inputs. We actually have a question for Ruth specifically. How does improving equality mainstreaming help to overcome existing inequalities linked with availability, affordability, and access to clean transport? Perhaps you can explain a little bit about what equality mainstreaming is in the first instance.
Okay, thank you, Georgie. Very, very interesting question. And if you hadn't asked it, or if somebody hadn't asked it, I would have come to the tool of equality mainstreaming myself. Actually, in order to ensure that the gender dimension and the equality dimension is represented and duly taken into account in all policy areas, the Commission specifically has committed in its sustainable and smart mobility strategy to apply equality mainstreaming to our transport policies, initiatives, and other activities. And equality mainstreaming means the integration of an equality perspective into the preparation, design, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation of policies, regulatory measures, and spending programs. It is actually the key practical tool to realize equality, the union of equality, the objective of this Commission, and notably also to realize gender equality. It means actually to take the perspective of different transport users and of transport workers in all their diversity when designing our initiatives. We have heard it several times that transport remains a very male-dominated area, and this number of 22% of women workers in the sector is unfortunately not a new one. It's already 5 years old, and it still hasn't changed. So the advantage is that I don't have to change my background, but the disadvantage is, of course, that we still have to make a lot of improvements in order to attract more women to the sector. And we have taken a very practical initiative in DG Move to help our colleagues apply equality mainstreaming in their daily work. We have had an external contractor carry out a screening of all our transport policies, initiatives, and also related funding programs to identify equality and gender gaps. And this contractor is now developing a specific training material, including an easy to use practical handbook, to ensure our staff, our colleagues are aware of equality mainstreaming and know how to apply it step by step in their daily work. And as was already mentioned before, equality and gender mainstreaming has also to be applied to our funding programs. We mentioned the Recovery and Resilience Facility as well, which includes an obligation for member states to show in their recovery plans that they have included initiatives to improve gender equality. I agree with Blondine that this is not yet perfect, but we're working on that.
And speaking of gender equality, but going into the inequality side of it, we have a question here. What do gender inequalities in transport mean for work-life balance? Perhaps the time use survey could be of use here to step into.
Certainly. Maybe I can start and, of course, fill in where needed. I think if you look at work-life balance in the transport sector, it's an often heard complaint for women also to work within it, but also to retain women in the workforce. You can see that there, for example, long hours or difficult places, or also if you look at sea transport, for example, long days from home. So these are concerns that need to be taken into account when thinking about how we can enlarge women's representation in the labor force, because as we've been talking about today, it's much needed.
Yeah, and from that perspective,
can I add something to that point?
Yes, please do. Yes, of course you can.
Yes. I just wanted to mention that we have published a study on staff scheduling and rostering good practices in the transport sector, which can help the sector, the industry, the different transport stakeholders in all modes of transport adapt their staff scheduling and rostering programs, and to allow better work-life balance for all their workers, because this is not only benefiting women, of course, this is benefiting all workers, and there are also fathers who want to look after, or to have time to look after their children. And of course, there is the necessity, especially in the transport sector, to allow for a basic service also at times which are maybe not which are contributing to long hours or long absences away. But these good practices show how this could be arranged in a way that all workers benefit, because there are some examples, good practice examples, that can also be transferred from one country to another, or from one mode to another, which show that, for example, some younger workers, they don't mind working at night, and there are also some buddy systems where colleagues can say with whom they want to work and with whom they do not want to work. For example, in aircraft, when two partners are working for the same air transport company. So there are really some good practices which have been proven, which are real practices, and where stakeholders can take inspiration from in order to improve work-life balance for their workers.
We actually have another question which could serve as an extension to this current angle of the conversation. What are the key barriers that prevent the recognition of current and newly emerging gender inequalities in the green transition policies in a more comprehensive way? Is it a lack of data, political will, a lack of knowledge, or is it something else?
I think that when you look at gender mainstreaming in every area, there's a lot of success factors and a lot of bottlenecks, a lot of obstacles, and they include a bit some of what you mentioned. For gender mainstreaming to work, we need some really strong political will, we need some adequate resources, we need the data and the analysis, and we need the evaluation and monitoring. We need all those components to work together for success to happen. So I imagine when it comes to the green transition, this is something. Clearly, the data is insufficient, but a lot of actors are actually working on it. So, but also the political will needs to be improved. There is a lot of good policies in place, as Annabelle mentioned. Now we need to implement it, and we need to keep the gender perspective at the front of the implementation of those policies.
Just in, we have another question which is really timely because I was about to go to a roundup, but I can read it out here. It's literally all happening in real time. What are the gendered implications of the cost of switching to more environmentally friendly forms of transport, such as low carbon vehicles? What can be done to address this? Open to all. I can repeat it as well because it is quite a loaded question. What are the gendered implications of the cost of switching to more environmentally friendly forms of transport, such as low carbon vehicles? You had mentioned some of these mobility forms. What can be done to address this?
Here it's maybe interesting also to look at intersecting inequalities, because we have to also look at the costs. If you see in a lot of the times women are overrepresented in lower income groups, so we have to see also there to see what are the costs of switching to personal vehicles, for example, in low carbon vehicles, and see if this is differentiated across genders. And that's, I mean, data and evidence point to the fact that that will be the case. So that is something that needs to be taken into account when we make that transition.
Yeah. Then I think this is an opportunity for us to come to the end of this webinar, and I will provide some top-line takeaways in service of that original aim for this webinar, which is to come away with a better understanding of why a gender perspective is needed for green and sustainable transport. We've learned that we have a big challenge on our hands to reduce carbon emissions. In fact, Blondine and I were having a conversation about this earlier, and you said this is actually a survival for humanity, which is really a very punchy way to create that sense of urgency, right? And transport is a key player in the overall climate action goals. But I mean, if we look at what transport really stands for, it's about connecting people and connecting them to access opportunities. But again, we keep saying this, but I think it's important to reinforce all the time that different people have different lived experiences and realities which can hinder their access to these opportunities. Therefore, policies, plans and projects, they all need to have a gender perspective to overturn the current negative trends and obstacles. We need more women in top positions for decision making who can reflect and represent not just women's needs, but the nuances within women's needs as well. And right now we're missing out on a lot of talent that could help to move us forward for better green mobility. And this was something that I think all of our speakers have touched on in some way or another. All structures, they need to speak to each other. Where there is a common goal, there needs to be a common path to get there. And above and beyond the initiatives, the measures, the tools, we need to accompany political will, dedication and commitment if we want to see meaningful change and sustainable change as well. And sometimes the most effective way to make a change is simply to take a step forward, several steps, maybe 3 steps forward. Which is an initiative that IGA had launched last year as a way to engage with our stakeholders, to get them to commit to their 3 steps forward for gender equality, which is something that we have now adapted for the context of our current campaign, moving towards green and gender equal Europe. So if you want to get some inspiration on what those steps could be, please head to our campaign website, where we've got some stakeholders who have chimed in on their climate action and gender goals and how they can be brought together within the scope of their work. And you can also contribute if you like at you can find our contact details there, and we'll be happy to support you in putting all of your steps together. And with that, I want to thank our external speakers who are no longer on the screen, but I trust that you're still there. Thank you so much for your time, your thoughtful considerations in bringing together a very, very fruitful and packed-in conversation, as well to our internal speakers as well for all the same. And to all of you who are watching, thank you so much for your participation. I hope you've learned something from this, and we also have next week's webinar, which looks at moving towards a green and gender equal energy transition. So for now, we'll see you next week. Thank you so much.